Next slide, please. While we're waiting for the meeting to start, I'd like to alert everyone that there's Spanish interpretation available for this meeting as outlined on this slide. Now I'm going to hand it over to Aldo, who will give the instructions in Spanish.
Hola, muy buenas noches a todos. Gracias por estar aquí presentes. El día de hoy tendremos también ofreciendo servicios de interpretación en español. Si algún asistente desea escuchar esta presentación en español, por favor busquen en la pantalla el icono en forma de un mundo. De ahí en adelante saldrá lo que viene siendo un icono en forma de un mundo de interpretación. Va a presionar el botón, se aparecerá la opción de español o en inglés Spanish. Haga clic ahí y automáticamente estará escuchando la reunión en español en su totalidad. Además, si tiene problemas o necesita ayuda técnica de interpretación o de cualquier otra índole, por favor, mande un mensaje utilizando la función de Q&A o preguntas frecuentes en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí presentes.
So next slide. So good evening. On behalf of the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board, welcome to our remote community meeting for the United Technologies Corporation former Canoga Avenue Facility. This property has also previously been referred to as the Pratt and Whitney Rocketdyne Canoga Avenue Facility and the former Rockwell International Corporation Facility, as well as Boeing, prior to UTC's ownership. My name is Susana Lagudis. I'm the Los Angeles Water Board's Public Participation Specialist, and I'll be facilitating the meeting tonight. The Los Angeles Water Board team asks for your patience and cooperation. While every effort has been made to streamline the virtual experience, there may be technical issues and human error. We'll attempt to correct any issues as quickly as possible. And I'm having one right now. Next slide, please. Tonight's agenda will include a welcome from the Los Angeles Water Board's Chair, Irma Munoz, an introduction to meeting ground rules and how to participate, and a brief presentation followed by a question and answer session to hear your comments and concerns. Now I'd like to introduce our board chair, Irma Munoz.
Good evening and welcome to our meeting. Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a nuestra junta. We would prefer to meet in person, but due to the coronavirus, we are safer at home. So we really appreciate your time that you're taking to attend this meeting and your patience in meeting with us virtually. Preferemos estar juntos en el mismo salón, pero por el virus coronavirus, estamos mejor y más sanas en nuestras casas. Apreciamos mucho el tiempo que van a estar con nosotros y ojalá nos dan la paciencia mientras estamos haciendo esto por Zoom. Our site cleanup program is an important part of the work of the board. Clean up the contamination to protect human health is one of the most critical functions as the board. The importance of public input to these processes having you participate helps us to better address everyone's concern. We are here to listen to you. You're probably wondering, she's just the board chair. What does she know? She's just here chairing this meeting. What does she know? I do want to tell you two things that will make you understand how important I know this meeting is to each and every one of you. First of all, 15 years ago, I founded a nonprofit called Mujeres de la Tierra, Women of the Earth. It's an environmental organization. And what we do currently, we work with women and their children and families in the Northeast Los Angeles area and lands right next to the Los Angeles River. Many of these lands are contaminated. And I became to quickly realize in listening to the women and the children that they had a lot of fear in their hearts. And I thought, what can we do to alleviate the frustration and fears that they have? And so what we decided to do is to put facts and science in their heads. And we listened to everybody's concerns. So I have personal experience what you're going through. You're frustrated, you're angry, you may be confused, and I know that you are scared. On a personal note, I live next to the largest urban oil field in the country, the Inglewood oil field. So as soon as I found out that I lived next to this big giant oil field, I started moving quickly and was just as concerned as you were. But I needed to understand facts and science and not listen to some of my neighbors who were not telling the truth, trying to create scandal, trying to create fear in all of us. And what I'm asking you to do is to listen to us, because we surely want to listen to each and every one of you. Now in Spanish. El programa de limpieza del sitio es muy importante para nosotros, limpiando contaminación para la protección de la salud de ustedes y sus hijos es lo más importante. Tenemos procesos que se van a usar, pero lo más importante es escucharlos a cada uno. Quizá dicen, esta señora que sabe de esto. Pues les voy a comentar dos cosas. Yo soy la fundadora y la presidente de un grupo sin lucrativa que se llama Mujeres de la Tierra. En ese papel trabajamos con mujeres y sus familias en el Northeast Los Ángeles, y allí está el río de Los Ángeles, y cerca del río hay muchos terrenos contaminados. So ustedes pueden imaginarse el miedo que tienen estas personas. Mis niños se van a enfermar, mis papás van a recibir cáncer. Tenían tanto miedo en el corazón. So nosotros decidimos educar y informar la comunidad con ciencia y datos. Porque tener miedo es lo peor que uno puede tener. Y además de eso, yo vivo en los pozos del aceite más grande que existen en Los Ángeles, que se llama el Inglewood Oil Field. Y yo sé este miedo, pero hoy vamos a decirles los datos usando ciencia, información y educación. Y más importante, los vamos a escuchar, porque queremos saber sus preocupaciones, sus miedos y todo lo que tienen que preguntar para que vivan un poco más cómodo. Esta junta es para ustedes, pero también para nosotros, para poder entender todo lo que están pensando, todo lo que han sufrido. Muy bienvenidos, y saben que se pueden comunicar conmigo cuando gusten. Mi teléfono está en el sitio de Los Angeles River Center, y aquí estoy para servirles uno y todos. Muchísimas gracias.
Next slide, please. Thank you so much, Irma. A bit of housekeeping before we get started. You may participate in this meeting in both English and in Spanish. For those of you who missed the instructions earlier, to listen to the meeting in Spanish, please select the Interpretation button on the bottom of your screen as shown in this slide, and select Spanish. This will place you in the Spanish audio channel where an interpreter will be translating the meeting in Spanish in real time. Next slide, please. There will be a question and answer session following this evening's presentation. There are two ways to ask a question or make a comment, and they are the same for both English and Spanish speakers. I'll go over them briefly now and in more detail when we get to the question and answer portion of the meeting. You may select the raise hand feature to ask a question verbally. My co-facilitator, Molly, will call on you when we're ready to respond to questions. Please wait until the Q&A portion of the meeting to raise your hand. Or you may select the Q&A feature on the screen, as shown on this slide, and type a question into the box that appears. I'll read your question aloud and it will be answered by our team during the Q&A portion of the meeting. So that we can hear from as many of you as possible during the time allotted for the meeting, we ask that everyone please limit themselves to one question at a time and try to stick to 2 minutes. And now I'd like to introduce the Los Angeles Water Board's Executive Officer, Renee Purdy, to begin the presentation portion of the meeting.
Thank you so much, Susanna, and thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. As many of you know, in late July, we let community members know that we are considering a decision about whether one part of the cleanup at this site related to the soil itself has been accomplished in accordance with a soil management plan that we approved in 2016. The cleanup of the soil is only one part of the cleanup here tonight, or at this site. Tonight, we'll also discuss the other parts of the cleanup that are continuing. I want to let you know that your safety and the cleanup of any contamination on-site and off-site are our foremost concerns. An important part of our decision-making process is to listen to you, those that may be affected by our decision, and to fully consider your questions and your comments to arrive at a decision that will protect your health and our groundwater. So our purpose tonight is to provide you with a forum to learn more about this site, the former Canoga Avenue Facility, and what is being done to clean it up, and to listen to your comments and concerns and answer as many of your questions as possible. Next slide, please. This meeting is for you, and we are here to listen. We know that contamination can be scary and that you may be concerned about your health and that of your family. Earlier, as the meeting was starting, we put up some guiding principles for our meeting with you this evening. They're shown here. They include our commitment to you to share with you the science and data about the contamination and the cleanup of this site, and listening to you and answering as many of your questions as possible. These principles also include treating each other with respect, and we respect you for being with us here tonight to talk to us about this site. I just want to note here that if anyone is disruptive, if absolutely necessary, we will mute or remove the person so that others can hear and be heard in a respectful environment. Next slide, please. Thank you. I want to take just a few minutes to talk about the Los Angeles Water Board. Some of you may be familiar with us, but for those who are not, I'd like to explain who we are and what we do very briefly. We're often mistaken as a local water agency, but we're actually a state regulatory agency. We're one of 9 regional water quality control boards who operate as part of what we call the State Water Resources Control Board. Collectively, we're known as the California Water Boards. You can see on this slide that we're one of 6 agencies that make up the California Environmental Protection Agency, or Cal EPA. I'll also note that we have someone from another Cal EPA agency here tonight, OEHA, or the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, who we work with very closely on sites such as this. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our mission at the California Water Boards is to protect and restore groundwater and surface water quality, and by doing so, to protect public health and the environment. With more than 10 million residents, the region that our office covers is the most populous of the 9 regional boards. It encompasses the 9 coastal watersheds within Los Angeles and Ventura counties, which are shown on this slide. It also encompasses 24 groundwater basins, covering over 1,500 square miles. This site is located in the upper portion of the Los Angeles River watershed and overlies the San Fernando Valley groundwater basin. Next slide, please. Thank you. There are many different programs at the Los Angeles Water Board. The most relevant here is the Site Cleanup Program, which is part of our groundwater division. The Site Cleanup Program is focused on ensuring that site investigation and cleanup activities restore water quality, protect public health, and the environment. And that's our top priority here, to ensure that the soil and groundwater contamination are cleaned up and your health is protected. Again, I want to thank you so much for being here. And before I turn it over to Arthur Heath, I'd also like to introduce 2 other board members that we have with us this evening. We have Vice Chair Yee and also Board Member Stahl, who will be listening to the meeting and the discussion this evening. And with that, I would like to now introduce Arthur Heath, who is Chief of the Site Cleanup Program.
Thank you, Renee. Good evening. My name is Arthur Heath, and I oversee the site cleanup program, which directs and oversees the cleanup of contaminated sites and groundwater for the water board. As this slide shows, we have a number of regulatory tools and the statutory authority to require assessment and cleanup. However, our authorities do not extend to local land use decisions, and we cannot require that land be used for a different purpose. That is the purview of local cities and counties. In this case, land use decisions are made by the City of Los Angeles. Next slide, please. Our site cleanup program follows a 5-step process as shown in the slide. We are a public agency charged with protecting the public's health. When a site is closed, that means that we agree that the site has been cleaned up to a safe level for the intended use of the site. We also work with the risk assessors at the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment to achieve a safe level at any site. The Notice of Opportunity comment letter that you may have received in today's meeting is not about closing this site. Rather, it's about acknowledging that the site's owner, UTC, has completed a major step in the cleanup process. Hugh Marley, the Assistant Executive Officer of the Groundwater Division, will now continue with the presentation. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Heath, and good evening, everyone. I'm Hugh Marley, Assistant Executive Officer of the Groundwater Division of the Los Angeles Region Water Quality Control Board. Tonight, I will go over a brief background of the site, then talk about what has been done to investigate and clean up the contamination. I also want to try and address some of the concerns the community has regarding the cleanup, your safety, and what is being done going forward, after which we will answer any questions you may have. It's important to know that we will not be making any decisions here tonight. We're here to listen to you, to take back your comments and concerns and make changes based on what we hear from you tonight, along with comments you may have already sent us. Next slide, please. This slide shows the site. It's located at 6633 Canoga Avenue in Canoga Park, California. It's a 47-acre parcel of land. It's bounded by Canoga Avenue to the east, Van Owen Street to the north, Owensmouth Avenue to the west, and Victory Boulevard to the south. It's also in the Warner Center 2035 specific plan development area and is designated as a mixed use area. Next slide, please. Rocketdyne, a technology company, first occupied the site during the 1950s, and it was a major employer in and around Canoga Park. All of NASA's large-scale engines for the Saturn and Space Shuttle programs were built here. However, these rockets were tested elsewhere. At the Santa Susana Field Lab, for example, no testing was done here. The site changed hands several times through the years, most recently being owned by the Boeing Company from 1996 until 2005, when it was sold to the Pratt & Whitney of United Technologies Corporation, or UTC, now also known as Raytheon. All operations at the site ended in April of 2014. The buildings were all demolished in 2016 and 2017, and the site is currently vacant land. Before I move on, I want to mention upfront one part of the site's history that's of concern to the community, and that's the operation of 2 nuclear reactors that existed in Building 38 at the site from 1956 to 1960. These were 2 desktop teaching and research reactors that were licensed by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, which later became the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the NRC. The NRC oversaw the closure of these operations in 1960 and also surveyed the area for radioactive contamination in 1995. None was identified. and no readings above background levels were detected in or around the area. In addition, UTC conducted an independent survey of the Building 38 site for radioactive materials after the building was demolished. This survey also found no impact from radioactive materials used at the facility. Next slide, please. So this is a big picture overview of the investigation and cleanup of contamination at the site to date and going forward. The industrial activities from the 1950s to 2014, building rocket engines for the space program, for example, contaminated the site with metals and solvents, mainly tetrachloroethene or PCE, trichloroethene or TCE, and semi-volatile organic compounds or SVOCs and PCBs. PCE and TCE are solvents commonly used to degrease and clean parts. Most of the impacts on site occurred during the 1960s and 1970s. We, meaning the Los Angeles Water Board, began overseeing the investigation and cleanup of these contaminants in 1984 and continue to do so today. I want to address another of your concerns here and stress that the site is not being closed. We are making good progress, but in fact, much of the cleanup, especially soil vapor and groundwater, is ongoing and has not been completed. Next slide, please. So in the previous slide, I said that past operations contaminated the groundwater. The upper graphic is a good illustration of how this can happen. Chemicals spilled or leaked during the rocket manufacturing operations, for example, in the building on the left, can filter down through the ground to the water table, where it then flows through layers of soil, also called aquifers, as you see shown in blue in the lower graphic. So we drill monitoring wells into these aquifers to figure out how far this contamination has traveled. And this is an example of a monitoring well shown on the top graphic on the right. So groundwater at this site, at this UTC site, is shallow. The top of the water table is approximately 16 feet below the ground surface. And it's important to note that the shallow waters under the UTC site are not currently used for any drinking water or agricultural purposes, and there are no municipal extraction wells in the area. The only wells here on site are monitoring wells. Next slide, please. So how do we go about cleaning up this contaminated groundwater once we find it? So this slide shows two effective methods that have been used at the site. The first in the upper graphic shows a typical pump and treat system. Contaminated groundwater in the aquifer, shown in pink, is pumped up and out through wells. The chemicals are removed, and then the clean water is either returned to the aquifer or pumped into storm drains or city sewers. A pump and treat system like this is used to treat all three aquifers on site and the shallow aquifer off-site to the east. So the lower graphic shows a second method of cleaning up groundwater on site called Enhanced In Situ Bioremediation, or EISB. This was also used on site. In this process, bacteria is injected into the contaminated groundwater, where it literally eats and destroys the chemical contamination, leaving clean groundwater. So these groundwater cleanup systems are effective in both cleaning up and preventing the continuing spread of groundwater contamination off-site. However, because of the extent of this contamination, cleanup is expected to continue for many years. Next slide, please. So three groundwater aquifers called the upper, intermediate, and deep sand zone aquifers are being investigated and cleaned up below the UTC site. And we used data from over 140 permanent and 150 temporary monitoring wells to find and track this contamination in these aquifers. So this map shows the current extent of the groundwater contamination in the shallow or upper sand zone aquifer in green. The gray plume behind it shows where it was 8 years ago. So you can see that the groundwater is being cleaned up with concentrations of contaminants dropping by 80% in the last 8 years. Next slide, please. So these two maps are current the current extent of the groundwater contamination in the intermediate and the deep sand zone aquifers, again in green. The larger gray plumes on the map show the extent of the contamination 8 years ago. So here too, you can see the progress we're making in cleaning up these plumes in the groundwater. The intermediate sand zone has the highest remaining concentration of the solvent TCE because historically it started where the biggest sources of the contamination were located. And in the deep sand zone, contamination is limited to a narrow area and it extends off-site to the northeast. But again, however, as we see on the map, the current conditions shown by the green plumes tell us that the groundwater cleanup operations are working. Groundwater here, to go over this again, is not currently used for any drinking water or agricultural purposes. There are no wells here, no municipal extraction wells in the area. Your drinking water in this area is provided by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and water quality reports are available on their website. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, I will go over the soil vapor contamination present at this site. Sometimes when chemicals, usually solvents, leak to the soil, they can evaporate into a gas and fill the spaces between soil particles, as shown in the middle of this graphic. This gas contamination is soil vapor. When there's enough of it, it can form a vapor cloud. Under certain conditions, chemicals can also literally bubble out of contaminated groundwater, to put it simply, and cause a vapor cloud in soil, as we see in the lower part of this graphic. Both these scenarios are occurring on the site, and we know soil vapor can travel upwards into spaces occupied by humans, as this graphic illustrates. So to find the extent of this contamination, over 500 soil vapor samples were collected. Next slide, please. So in the last slide, I pointed out that soil vapor can travel upwards into spaces occupied by humans. This is also a major concern raised by you, the community, and we know that the soil vapor assessment conducted at UTC shows us that some areas of the site have soil vapor levels that are high enough to prevent developing the site without addressing the contamination. We can do this through further cleanup and by requiring developers to engineer in vapor protection into future structures. So though the soil vapor concentrations are of concern, they should continue to decrease over time since the sources of the contamination are being cleaned up. Much of the contaminated soil has been removed and groundwater remediation activities are ongoing. The soil vapor data is now dated, and UTC is conducting another soil vapor investigation to get a fresh picture of the soil vapor conditions as they are today. Notably, the sampling occurring now is an outgrowth and a response to comments we have already received from you. We are overseeing this investigation and expect it to be implemented by the end of the year. So I'll turn the presentation over now to Ms. Sophie Froelich, an attorney with the Office of Chief Counsel, to address some of the legal protections we have to protect human health. Sophie?
Thank you. And I apologize, I'm having a few technical difficulties. So if we're not on the slide that says at the top, site cleanup soil vapor, if we could advance, that would be great. Slide 24.
We are.
Thank you. At the start of this presentation, we stressed that one of our goals was to protect human health. One way that we do this is to record an environmental land use covenant or deed restriction with the county recorder's office. This ensures that no development can occur on the site unless and until it is deemed safe and protective of the occupants. The deed restriction here includes, but is not limited to, the following restrictions. First, right now, the site can only be developed for commercial and industrial purposes. However, if more cleanup is done and the regional board determines that the site is safe for residents, then the regional board will allow the deed restriction to be amended and the land and buildings on it, or which may be constructed on it, if none are at that time, can be used for housing. Second, any development, whether it's commercial, industrial, or later residential, must include a mitigation plan to ensure that vapor in the soil will not be present in the buildings at levels that will harm human health. Long-term monitoring and testing will ensure that the site will remain safe for as long as anyone uses the buildings that might be built on the site. So next slide, and I will hand it back to Hugh.
Thank you, Sophie. To recap, we've talked about how the groundwater was contaminated and how it's being cleaned up. And we went over where we are on the soil vapor assessment and the legal protections in place to protect human health from vapor contamination. In the next few slides, I'll go over what's being done to address contaminated soil at the site. We'll start with the assessment of the soil matrix. This was a large industrial site, and there were many areas where chemicals from waste storage areas, degreasers, clarifiers, plating areas, sumps and pits contaminated the soil. Between 2016 and 2017, after all the buildings and their foundations were demolished, UTC investigated and identified 48 areas where soil was impacted and required remediation. Next slide, please. So there are many methods to remediate soil contamination. Excavation and removal of the contaminated soil is generally the most efficient. Also, the 48 acres where soil was identified as being contaminated, they were excavated under a Los Angeles Water Board approved Soil Management Plan, or SMP. This photo shows how it was done. Close to 9,000 tons of contaminated soil was excavated and taken to facilities licensed to accept such wastes. Once the contaminated soil was removed, samples are collected to verify that all contaminated soil was removed. Next slide, please. In December of 2017, after the soil was excavated and verification samples were collected, UTC submitted a soil remediation closure report. This report documents the soil activity and states that the remaining soil on site is protective of human health at levels that would allow for residential and/or commercial land use. UTC also asked the Los Angeles Water Board to concur that the soil remediation removal followed the approved soil management plan. As is our practice, before any decision was made, on July the 27th, 2020, we posted an opportunity to comment letter notifying you, the public, of our intent to consider the issuance of a soil completion letter. Based on comments received, the executive officer extended the comment period from September the 25th to October the 26th, 2020. And that brings us full circle as to why we're here tonight. We're here to listen to you, help you understand the investigation and the cleanup that's happening on this site, and to show you the steps we take as a regulatory agency to ensure the safety of your health, the health of future occupants of this site and of the environment. Next slide. So this is a prominent site. It's important to many stakeholders like you. And as I mentioned earlier, we make it a point to listen to your concerns and to address them. That being said, I wanted to take a moment to provide some clarification on a few items raised by members of the public to date. First, I need to stress that this site is not being closed. Only a portion of the remedial actions necessary to close the site have been completed. We want to make it clear that there is more work to be done. Regional board oversight to conduct the necessary work to clean up the site and protect human health continues. Additionally, we should clarify that the site is separate from the Santa Susana Field Laboratory, or the SSFL, site owned by Boeing. The SSFL site is located 10 miles northwest of the project site and is not connected to the Canoga Avenue Facility. Next slide, please. So as we discussed earlier, the soil matrix in this case, which specifically refers to the soil above the groundwater table. This soil, it's been remediated to clean up goals approved by the state's Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment to meet unrestricted land use conditions, including residential development. To be clear, this is for soil contamination only. It does not include soil vapor, which we pointed out continues to be a concern and is being addressed. So engineering controls are required for any structure to be developed to protect future occupants, and controls are specified in the land use covenant that Sophie talked about. As is often done, this provides an opportunity to put the site to beneficial use as opposed to leaving it dormant while remedial actions are continuing. So thank you for your participation. I'll now turn the presentation over to our Executive Officer, Renee Purdy. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Hugh. I appreciate that detailed presentation. I want to just take a minute or two to talk now about what our next steps are from here. So the first step that we have, of course, is to continue our consideration of the decision about whether the cleanup of the soil itself has been accomplished in accordance with the soil management plan that I said we approved in 2016. We won't be making any decision about that until we have fully considered the written comments that we received in response to the opportunity to comment letter that we sent out this summer, as well as the comments and questions that we hear this evening. The next step is the continuation of the ongoing cleanup and monitoring of groundwater. And then also, as you heard from Hugh, will be additional soil vapor sampling and evaluation under our oversight. And then based on that additional sampling and evaluation, we will evaluate what other actions may be necessary to address soil vapor. And then the other item that I wanted to point out, which you heard a bit about from Sophie Froelich, is the submittal of a plan for an implementation of soil vapor mitigation measures at this site. And so with that, that concludes our presentation. We want to leave plenty of time for your comments and your questions, and answering as many of them as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. I just want to thank everybody for being here again, and we look forward to our discussion with you and answering your questions and trying our best to address your concerns about this site. Thank you so much, and I will turn it over now to Susanna to help us transition from this presentation portion and get ready for our Q&A.
Thanks, Renee. We're going to take a 5-minute break before the question and answers portion of the meeting. So stretch your legs, rest your eyes, and we'll be back to hear from you at 6:46 p.m. See you then.
Yeah.
I think we should be ready to come back. So if somebody can turn back on our video, please. Thank you. Great. So next slide, please. Welcome back, and we're going to begin the question and answer portion of the meeting now. Next slide, please. To review, there are 2 ways to ask a question, and the instructions are the same for Spanish and English speakers. First, you can select the raised hand feature to ask a question verbally, as seen on the slide. Keep your hand raised virtually, and my co-facilitator, Molly, will call on you and alert you that you are being unmuted when it's your turn. Please also lower your hand once you've asked your question. Or you may select the Q&A feature on the screen and type a question into the box that appears. I'll read those questions aloud and they will be answered by our team. Questions received via the Water Board's website in advance of the meeting will also be read aloud and answered by the team. The interpreter, Molly, and I will do our best to move between the questions coming from both the English and the Spanish speakers, as well as between the raised hands and the questions coming in through the Q&A feature. Next slide, please. Here are the panelists from the Los Angeles Water Board, our sister agency, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and Los Angeles City Planning, who will be answering your questions tonight. So that we may hear from as many of you as possible during the time allotted for the meeting, we ask that everyone limit themselves to 1 question at a time and try to stick to 2 minutes. Please be patient and hopefully everyone will have an opportunity to participate. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to start with raised hands. So if Molly, if you can tell us who's raised their hand.
Absolutely. So our first question is going to be from Jane Williams. Jane, it is now your turn to ask a question. Please allow a moment for us to unmute your microphone. Once you're unmuted, you may ask your question.
Okay, thank you so much. This is Jane Williams. I'm the Executive Director of California Communities Against Toxics. And we have had extensive communications with staff on this project. And I want to thank the staff for that robust debate and communications. We continue to have really serious concerns about this site. This site has some of the highest vapor intrusion concentration numbers that we have seen. And we have looked at and have actively worked on a number of contaminated sites in the Los Angeles basin and in San Francisco. And so it continues to puzzle us. Why do you keep making these decisions when the site is still very contaminated? You know, why did we issue a land use covenant when the site is not clean? And would restrict future land uses, right? I mean, the land use covenant would not even, in our estimation, allow the property to be used for commercial uses because the vapor intrusion numbers are so high. And now it seems like we're trying to move forward on something that is saying you've cleaned the soil, but the soil vapors are still very contaminated. And, you know, I wanted to tell you, I was out of my archive building and I found my old copy of the Porter Cologne Act that was given to me by the executive officer of the Water Board in 1992. And I looked in there and I did not see a distinction between soil vapor and soil. So I am very puzzled as to why we could be issuing a closure letter for soil while the soil vapors are still contaminated. So maybe one of you can answer that question for me.
Thank you, Jane, for that. That's a good question, and I tried to touch on it during the presentation. As you pointed out too, we're not closing the soil at the time. We are not closing the soil. We know there's still work to be done. What we are simply saying, and we know, as you pointed out, that there is a soil vapor problem. There's also a groundwater problem. What we are saying is there was soil remediation done, and it was done in accordance with the soil management plan, and that's it. We're concurring, or UTC is asking us to concur that the soil excavation was done in accordance with the soil management plan. Sophie, would you like to talk about the the LUC?
Thank you, Hugh. And thank you, Ms. Williams. Thank you for coming here this evening. You know, in many cases, land use covenant is recorded at the very end of a cleanup. But sometimes, like in this case, it is recorded earlier in order to be protective and ensure that everyone knows that the site is still contaminated, so that if anything goes forward, we are being protective and we have control over that. It notifies the city, it notifies all persons who might buy or build on the property, and therefore we all are on the same page, hopefully, and can be protective. And to that end, I just want to note too that the Water Code allows these kinds of land use covenants to be placed on the land if the land is not safe for unrestricted uses such as residential uses. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We are notifying you, we're notifying the public, we're notifying the city, we're making sure anyone who might buy this land understands that. And then we're putting in controls that say if you do buy it, if you do develop it, we have to approve what you do. And so this is our attempt to be more protective in that regard. I hope that answers some of your land use questions. And if I missed something, please let me know.
This is Jim.
Go ahead.
This is Jim Carlisle. I think I can add a little bit to the source, a discussion of the source of the soil vapor. Soil vapor can originate from contamination in the vadose zone or in the groundwater. And I believe in this case, even though, as you say, there is a concern about soil vapor, we believe that the major source of this is the groundwater, not the soil.
Thank you, Dr. Carlisle. Do we have another? Let's move to the next raised hand, please.
Okay, great. Our next question will be from Jim Wells. Jim, it is now your turn to ask a question. Please allow a moment for us to unmute your microphone. Once you are unmuted, you may ask your question.
Good evening, everybody. Can folks hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. This is Jim Wells. I'm an environmental geologist with the firm L. Everett and Associates, and I'm here tonight representing California Communities Against Toxics. And I also want to thank Executive Officer Purdy and her staff for very meaningful and substantial conversations that we've had about this site in recent months. Couple comments. There are still very high concentrations of PCE and TCE in shallow soil vapor. And closing soil with vapor levels this high is inconsistent with water board actions at many other VOC sites. I want to also reinforce Jane Williams' comment that we usually here in California grant soil closure only if both soil and soil vapor are sufficiently clean at VOC sites. Granting soil closure would also be inconsistent with the 2020 draft statewide vapor intrusion guidance. Under that vapor intrusion guidance, this site would not be found to be protective of human health due to the risk of vapor intrusion in future structures. I'd like to respond to Mr. Carlisle's comment. We believe that part of the problem is that Raytheon is advancing a flawed conceptual site model. They claim that residual soil vapor is mostly coming from groundwater, and that does imply that the concentrations would gradually decline over time. However, we were able to show that most of the soil vapor hotspots at this site do not coincide with areas of groundwater impact. So this conceptual site model can't be correct. And the implication is that there must be undiscovered pockets of soil matrix contamination that remain, that are causing or contributing to vapor hotspots. So I'll finally get to a question and then I'll close. The Water Board has the option to simply concur that a phase of work at a site has been completed. That's not the same as granting partial closure or soil closure. And indeed, there's no scientific or policy mandate to grant partial closure. So my question is, why is the Water Board considering granting partial closure for a site it acknowledges isn't cleaned up, rather than simply acknowledging that one phase of work has been completed, as you routinely do in letters to responsible parties? Phase of work has been completed in accordance with some associated work plan. That would be much less consequential than granting soil closure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wells, for that question and your comments. And I want to respond by again stating that we're not closing soil over here. We're not giving UTC a partial closure. The letter that we have in front of us is merely a letter documenting that UTC conducted their soil excavation in accordance with the soil management plan. And regarding your comments about the vapor numbers being high and the likelihood of other sources, I want to point out that we are doing, or UTC is doing, another round of soil vapor sampling, and it's going to address the hot areas that you spoke of. It's also going to do extensive perimeter testing, and if there's anything identified there, of course, our process. We will step out. We will do more sampling. We will test the soil for secondary contamination if necessary. So I hope I answered your question there, Dr. Wells.
So thank you. I'm going to now move to read aloud verbatim 2 questions that came in through the Q&A feature. And then after that, I will also read aloud 2 questions that came in previous to the meeting through our website. So actually the first thing that came in from the community through the Q&A was from Chris Rowe, and she wanted to thank Chair Irma Munoz for attending the meeting. So that doesn't count as a question. So we still have 2 questions. We have a question from Thomas that asks, what about sediment contamination in the aquifers?
Thank you, Thomas. When you're referring to sediment contamination in the aquifers, I'm assuming you're talking about soil contamination, or the soil being a source of the contamination in the aquifers. UTC's investigation excavated 48 areas of soil contamination that they had identified. If the groundwater is going through the aquifers, and yes, there is a groundwater plume, but as my two charts showed, the groundwater plume is being contaminated. It is being pulled back. The plumes are getting smaller, and if the source is gone, if the source on site is gone, there's not going to be more sediment contamination. It's in the groundwater, and the groundwater is being cleaned up. Dr. Arthur Heath or Anna, would you like to add to that?
Sure, I can add to that. Sorry, this is Anna Townsend, I'm the project manager, and I agree with you. We are continuing to clean up the groundwater, and the soils have been excavated, and the groundwater is going to be an ongoing process, and we're evaluating that consistently and making sure that's being cleaned up as fast as possible.
Okay, so now we have a question from Shabir Bambot. Well, there's a statement and a question. The current cleanup status is that cancer-causing TCE and PCE levels have been reduced by 80%. So 20% remains. How much must the level be reduced in order for the site to be used for commercial purposes? And they have the same question for residential purposes.
So you're talking about the groundwater and the contamination levels in the groundwater, and as you mentioned, well, thank you for your question to start off with. But as you mentioned, the groundwater is being cleaned up, and I assume your question is, what are the cleanup goals for groundwater? And what are the cleanup goals for groundwater? Well, the way the water board site cleanup process works is, when there's contamination in groundwater, we start off with we start off by saying that the groundwater's got to be cleaned up to background or non-detect, according to our policies 92-49, for example. So while the cleanup's going, this can be modified depending on the technological limits of cleaning up the groundwater and or economic feasibility. But basically, we're at the point right now where the groundwater must be cleaned up to background or non-detect. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move to two questions that we received ahead of the meeting. The first one is from Karen DiBiase, and I do apologize if I'm butchering people's names. The question says, well, there's a comment and a question. Are there plans to subdivide the property so there will be different cleanup levels required on each separate site that would be based on the potential end use of those areas, i.e. commercial versus residential? And if so, where would these residential sites be located?
Oh, thank you for that question. That's a land use and zoning question. And fortunately, we have representatives from the city with us. And would one of the representatives from the city like to take this?
Hi, good evening. Yes, my name is Blake Lamb, and I'm Principal City Planner with the Los Angeles Planning Department. And thank you for including the Planning Department in this meeting tonight, and thank you for the question. So at this point in time, I want to be very clear that no development project has been yet submitted to the City Planning Department for review for this project site. So we don't currently have any plans in our office for any sort of development project on the site. So we really can't answer that question, because ultimately, if a developer chooses to propose a project for the site, they will need to follow the rules and regulations that are located within the Warner Center 2035 specific plan. And the Warner Center 2035 specific plan is an ordinance. It creates rules and regulations for any future proposed development on the site. It also includes an environmental impact report, which contains a series of mitigation measures that would need to be followed for any future project at the site. It also sets forth the procedures for how a future project would need to be processed by the planning department. And it would be a public process. So at such a time that a project was actually submitted to the planning department, there would be a process, and anyone who wished to be part of that could certainly access publicly available information about that process. So at this point in time, we don't have any information on any future phasing or how the project site might be developed, as we don't currently have a project under review at this time. Thank you.
So the next question is from Eric.
And Suzanne, I'm sorry. I just want to clarify the previous question. In terms of any site that we're considering closing, if the intended use is residential, the entire property would be closed at a residential or unrestricted land use determination. If it's going to be a mixed use property, which means commercial / industrial and residential, we would still close the property at an unrestricted land use level, even though it might be subdivided. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heath. So the second question that I'm going to take from the list of questions that were submitted ahead of time is from Eric Ivaner. And the question is, what will you do to ensure the public safety at this site? And what will you do to prove the site is safe?
Thank you, Eric. So it's another good question. So to ensure public safety at this site, we have a regulatory process to follow, and that includes full assessment of the site, sampling, developing cleanup goals or cleanup levels, the cleanup itself, confirmation sampling, and then monitoring and risk assessments. Risk assessments, which are the human health risk assessments done by OHIHA. So the cleanup goals that we have, they're required to be protective of human health and groundwater. And if the cleanup meets its intended risk level to support a commercial or residential land use, then the site is safe to use. And then to add to that, we also have a land use covenant that Sophie talked about, and that's designed to make sure that any future residents and any workers on site, development on site, is done safely. So I hope that answers that question. And your second part was, what do you do to prove the site is safe? So to prove the site is safe, I talked about monitoring wells. I talked about soil vapor samples, and that is it. That's the data. That's the science. We sample the soil, we sample the soil vapor, and we sample the groundwater. And that gives us confirmation that the site is safe for human health. So thank you, Eric. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, so Molly, it's time for 2 raised hands again. In this little round robin here, so that everybody gets a chance to participate in the way that's the most accessible and easy for them. Do we have any more raised hands?
Great, yes, we do. Our next question will be from Gina Thornburg. Gina, it is now your turn to ask a question. Please allow a moment for us to unmute your microphone. Once you are unmuted, you may ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Gina Thornburg. Thank you very much, all of the members of the panel. Thank you so much for this Q&A session. I really appreciate it. I'm the Executive Director of Coalition for Valley Neighborhoods, and we have some concerns. What is the reasoning behind distinguishing among land use types if no type of use may be approved without vapor intrusion engineering control systems. Many people work in commercial entities upwards of 8 hours a day, a comparable number of hours to those spent sleeping in residences. Are the vapor intrusion engineering control systems for commercial and industrial uses the same in every way as for residential? If they are different, how do they differ? The LA Water Board states that contaminated vapor will be vented, quote, away from on-site development, allowing it to dissipate outdoors, end quote. How is such venting safe for people who work on or visit the site or live nearby? What entity will monitor developers to make sure that the health and safety of laborers and workers are protected during redevelopment? Your maps tonight show that the vapor plume exists under current buildings along Van Owen. How is the health of those buildings' occupants being safeguarded from these vapors? And then to Ms. Blake Lamb's point, since when does the EIR for the Warner Center specific plan include mitigation of the type and amount of toxic contamination that exists on this site, considering that the EIR is almost 9 years old? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Thornburg. There were a number of questions there.
Yes.
And I will start off trying to answer your questions, and I think we are going to have to ask you to repeat your questions as we go along. So the first one is about the mitigation measures. Are they the same for industrial buildings as for residential areas? And it's all going to depend on the contamination and the soil vapor itself. So there are a huge number of mitigation measures available, including vapor barriers, including piping under the vapor barriers that pull out vapor either actively or passively, indoor ventilation, HVAC systems. So there's a number of them, but I think I'm going to turn you over to Dr. Arthur Heat and to Jim Carlisle, the risk assessor, and Dr. Arthur Heat, who is the site cleanup chief, to add to that and answer your questions.
Yeah, there are a lot of parts to the questions and a lot of topics. For this particular site, the groundwater, the contaminated groundwater is very shallow. And we're going to go back, we're going to look at some of the issues that Dr. Wells brought up in terms of elevated vapors in the soil and any potential elevated areas where there may be TC or PCE located. But even if once that's hypothetically, if all of that's cleaned up and there's very low acceptable concentrations that do exist that are perceived to be or evaluated by OHIA to be safe, either for commercial or residential, the board was still, we would make the recommendation at the staff level to still have these site mitigation system. And why is that? Because the shallow groundwater between 16 and 19 feet is contaminated. It's being treated, however, it's still off-gassing into the soil, and it moves up through the soil and into the shallow soil. So there still would be a need for some safeguard to protect any commercial and or residential occupant at the site. And Jim, any comments? Jim Carlisle?
Yeah, thank you, Art. With regard to the differences between the safe levels for commercial industrial use and the safe levels for residential use, the difference is accounted for primarily by the difference in exposure scenarios. Residents are assumed to be exposed to the vapor intrusion into their homes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whereas commercial and industrial sites, the workers wouldn't be exposed for as long, typically more like 40 to 50 hours a week. And also commercial industrial buildings have different kinds of ventilation systems than residences do.
All right. Is there another raised hand, Molly?
Yes. Our next question will be from Steve Baird. Steve, it is now your turn to ask a question. Please allow a moment for us to unmute your microphone, and once you're unmuted, you may ask your question.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hello, Regional Board. How are you doing this evening? My question is, why is the Water Board considering a soil closure letter at this time when it admits further vapor and groundwater remediation is necessary? Just down the street at the former yacht manufacturing site, a closure letter was not issued until both soil and groundwater was remedied, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Beard, for that comment and question. And again, I just want to point out that we're not closing the soil. We're not issuing a soil closure letter. It's just a letter saying that soil was remediated in accordance with the work plan at the site. And we fully acknowledge and understand there's a lot more work to be done at the site to protect human health. That's a fact. That's a given, and we're not trying to skirt that issue. And you mentioned another site down there in the area that was closed. You're referring to Catalina Yachts, and that's a good example too, because at that site, that was also once associated with the same industrial operations, and we closed that site. It closed clean. The soil is clean over there. There's no soil vapor issues, and the groundwater is clean. It was cleaned up to background. So there's a perfect example of our process working. We had an industrial site, we remediated it, or we oversaw the remediation, and we closed it clean. That also went through public comment, and we didn't have any concern raised from the community about that, because it was a clean site, understandably. So I hope I answered your question, Mr. Baird. Staff, anyone like to talk more on that? Anna, you worked on the Catalina Yacht site. Okay. Thank you, Susanna.
Okay, so I'm going to try to remind myself and everybody else if we can slow down a little bit just to help the Spanish interpreters who are on a different channel, helping everybody understand what's going on. And it takes a little bit of time, and there's a little time lag. So I'll try to slow myself down as well. So I'm going back to questions received through the Q&A chat here on the actual Zoom platform. And we have a question from Brad. It says, is there any potential hazard to the LA River, which runs parallel to Bassett, from contaminated groundwater?
Thank you for that, Brad. And the answer is no. As you saw in my plume maps, the plumes go as far as Millwood Avenue, and even at their worst, they went as far as that, and as if you recall, the gray area of the plume show, but and the green area shows that they are being pulled back. They are being cleaned up. They're being pulled back. There was no contamination to the LA River. There was sampling done in the LA River, and there were 10 rounds of sampling done that came up clean. And also, Brad, the plumes that you're talking about going offsite, those are deep plumes. Those are not the shallow plume at the surface level of the LA River. So to put it short, the short answer is no. Thank you.
So Chris Rowe had wanted us to ask, she asked, can we please show the addresses across Van Owen from the site? But I'm not sure that, and she says that there are plans to build apartments at 21515 Van Owen. And she thinks that the building was on our slide, but I am not sure what the question is. Maybe does city planning perhaps have any idea about plans to build apartments at 21515 Van Owen? Or maybe we can get back to Ms. Rowe about this.
Yes, this is Tim Fargo with City Planning. So there is a project that is at 21515 Van Owen. I don't know if it's possible to bring up those maps again that you had up so that we could look at the location. However, I've looked at the maps that were shown and compared it to the location of 21515 Van Owen, and it appears that the groundwater plumes on the map do not appear to be underneath that development in either the upper sand, the intermediate, or the deep sand zones. I should also note, as Blake Lamb had mentioned earlier, that any project of this scale has the mitigation measures from the environmental impact report, and the mitigation measures require environmental site assessments that increase depending on what is found. And also there's mitigation measures requiring that the project meets the requirements of the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Having said that, we don't have the case file documents in front of us because because we're meeting here about the UTC site. However, if there's any other further questions that you have about this project, we're happy to answer any questions you have later. So I don't know if my contact information was on that slide that was put up earlier, but my email is tim.fargo@lecity.org. So you can direct any other questions to me. And again, if we could bring up that slide again to kind of show where it is, because that particular project is west of Alabama and north of Van Owen.
Okay, do we know a slide number maybe, Hugh, and maybe somebody can help us and take us back to the slides that had the maps on them?
Yes.
It's slide 20 and 21.
Okay, great. I'll get back to those.
And just to add to Tim, you are correct. The groundwater plumes flow to the northeast of the property and not towards the northwest.
So I don't know if this is the slide you're referring to, Tim, or if it's the next one.
Yeah, all three, I guess, because this one shows the upper sand zone. And so with this one, it looks like the previous extent of the plume, and I don't know what date that was. 2006, there may have been a corner that
that was like 8 years ago.
And I think the other two maps showed nothing underneath the site.
Can you change the slide to the next one, please?
Yeah. So the project Ms. Rose talking about is north of Van Owen and west of Alabama.
Okay. And she can always speak to you further, correct, Tim?
Yes, yes.
And Sophie and Tim, I'd like to jump in really quick and also say that we are doing a new soil vapor assessment on the site, and there is going to be soil vapor assessment done along the perimeter of the site. So that is going to provide us with data showing whether there is a soil vapor issue at the perimeter of the site. That may require us to step out into the neighborhood and across the street. But we are in the process of reviewing that work plan, and we will have that data soon. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to go to one more question from the Q&A chat. It's from Faith Larson. Actually, it's two questions in one. If the Water Board anticipates future investigation and remediation of the soil, why would it issue any kind of soil closure letter or even a potential work plan closure? Further, should the Water Board plan on issuing a future work plan, how is the public supposed to have meaningful comment on the current action when we don't have that future work plan in hand to review?
Thank you. Susanna, could you please repeat the first question?
The first question is if the Water Board anticipates, it's similar to the questions that we've heard so far. If the Water Board anticipates future investigation and remediation of the soil, why would it issue any kind of soil closure letter or even a potential work plan closure?
Okay, so again, thank you for that question. So once again, we're not doing a soil closure letter. We're simply, the letter that we have in front of us for consideration and for your comment is that work was done in accordance with a work plan that was approved by the Water Board. That's it. We're not saying that there is no other soil work to be done. As Dr. Wells in an earlier question pointed out, as Jane Williams pointed out, there may be hotspots, so there may be areas around the site that are secondary sources contributing to soil vapor. And we're in the process of investigating that through the soil vapor work that we're doing now. And if we find that, we can address them. So it's the letter that we have in front of you for consideration is very specific. It simply says, there was an approved work plan. It said, do these steps, and they were done. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, and the second part of that question, or the second question in the same chain, is further, should the Water Board plan on issuing a future work plan, how is the public supposed to have meaningful comment on the current action when we don't have that future work plan in hand to review?
Okay, and this goes back to making documents available for public review and public comment. And Anna and Art, could you talk about how the public has access and has the ability to comment, review and comment on work plans and documents?
Sure, and Anna can chime in anytime she wants. When we request a work plan from a responsible party, the work plan is submitted to GeoTracker. GeoTracker is a state database. It houses information from the site cleanup program, from the UTC, the underground tank program, any waste discharge requirements issue are put into GeoTracker. GeoTracker is available for the public. There's other ways of notifying the public. It could be quite a task if you request that you would like to review a work plan, and it's not our typical process to do that. We would consider that adding you to a CC list. But I think the best way, if you can maneuver through GeoTracker, is to go to GeoTracker, and we can give you the link to the particular site, case, etc., and work plan.
May I add something to that?
Yes.
Because we do have a public participation process. So in this case, when we have a work plan for any cleanup work, our process generally is to issue a project update, communicating what is going on in that particular moment at the site, that we've received a cleanup plan, a work plan for cleaning up, whether it's an interim or a final remedial action plan. And those generally go out for public comment.
And that's correct, Susanna. Definitely for cleanup plans, but not all assessment plans.
Correct.
Yes.
And may I, Susanna, this is Renee.
Yes.
May I chime in as well? Because I believe, listening to the question from Ms. Larson, I think that one of her concerns, maybe if I'm reading it or understanding it correctly, is a concern that it will be difficult to comment on the current action of indicating whether or not the work done under the soil management plan that we approved in 2016 has been completed satisfactorily if there's not this future work plan that we've been talking about. But I just want to clarify what Hugh was, I think, trying to clarify as well, which is the action that we noticed in July is to determine whether that work plan was completed in 2016. The additional work that we've been discussing tonight about, for example, the additional assessment of soil vapor would be another work plan. And as you've just heard, there would be another opportunity to both learn about that work plan, and then once work was completed under that work plan, another opportunity to comment. But I just wanted to clarify, it seems as though there was a bit of a concern that there would be some information that would be needed, that would be lacking to make a decision on the completion of the work under the 2016 work plan. But we're really talking about two different sets of work that would be undertaken.
Okay,
Thank you.
And I just wanted to chime in as well. The soil vapor work plan has not actually been uploaded to GeoTracker just yet. That's loaded pretty soon. And like Art said, you can sign up for notifications on GeoTracker to get notified when things are uploaded. And if you guys have difficulty doing that, just send me an email. I think my information's on that panelist slide.
Yeah, and it should have been on the invitation to this meeting and to all the other project documents that you all have received in the mail. So you can always contact Anna or myself, and Anna will help you navigate through GeoTracker and help you understand what the plan is. So I'm going to check that off. And now we're going to go to two questions that we received previous to the meeting. But in the meantime, I do have a request. I just wanted to let everybody know. We have a lot of raised hands and people are raising their hands doubly. We'd like to give everybody a chance to ask a question through the raise hand feature, and then we'll go back and pick up who's already asked a question after that, after we get through them. But we still have a good hour to go. So hopefully, all things being equal, we'll be able to get to everyone. So let's see, I'm trying to find here because some of the questions we received in advance were questions that people have already asked. So I'm gonna go down here. Okay, so Rick Spalding asks, he has two questions. Is DTSC proceeding with investigations relative to the remediation of the Santa Susana Pass and the Canoga Avenue site?
Thank you, Mr. Spalding. The DTSC, I mean, it's best to contact DTSC for information on the Santa Susana site. This is totally unrelated to that site. This is its own project in its own right. So DTSC is the best agency to contact about what's going on at the with DTSC's cleanup at Santa Susana. Thank you.
And the second part of that is, when will a determination be made as to the start of the recommended remediation of the Santa Susana Pass site for Rockadine?
Again, that's DTSC related, a question best answered by DTSC for the Santa Susana site. So I would suggest that you contact DTSC to discuss that. This one is totally different. It's separate. It's not part of Santa Susana. And thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so now I think we're going back to the raised hands.
Excellent. Our next question will be from Senator Henry Stern. It is now your turn to ask your question. Please allow a moment for us to unmute your microphone, and once you're unmuted, you may ask your question.
Great. Am I coming through okay?
Yes.
All right. Hey, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I know there are further substantive questions that are going to be asked, but I just wanted to briefly say thank you to everyone who's been doing their diligence throughout this call and this listening session, and especially the Chair Munoz for making time to come out to the community, even though we all can't be sitting together, to feel the level of expertise and the level of concern and the level of passion in this stretch of our little neighborhood in the West San Fernando Valley. I just appreciate you all listening tonight, and we heard really quality insights that hopefully will help inform your thinking at the Water Board from, Dr. Wells, like was just mentioned, and Jane and everyone at the Community Against Toxics. And anyway, there's a really great group here. Coalition for Valley Neighborhoods has also been obviously very diligent, and I want to thank Gina and Karen for that. So, the thing I guess my question is, what I just heard is that there's going to be no, the project isn't sort of destined to proceed based on this evening, depending on the approval of this particular work plan document, that there are going to be other stage gates along the way and more diligence to be done, including that perimeter test that just got mentioned on the sort of the perimeter vapor testing. So just to be crystal clear, this community's going to have another shot to weigh in on whether they feel the science and the diligence supports the health and safety finding. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Stern. You put that very succinctly and accurately. This is not the end all here. We are closing nothing here today. We're not making any decisions here today. And you are right, the public will have many, many more bites at the apple as we proceed with the vapor remediation, with the remaining soil vapor assessment, with the groundwater cleanup. And we will make every effort to keep the public informed, in the loop, and listen to them and hear their concerns, and give them the science and the data that so to inform them and their decisions. Thank you, Senator Stern.
I really appreciate that, and we'll be staying in close touch on this. And again, want to appreciate all the staff's work too here. You guys have really made yourself available, including the City of LA. Thanks for being in here. So hey, we'll be here to be partners and an extra layer of due diligence along with all the great leaders in our community. So thanks again for holding this tonight.
Senator Stern, this is Irma. First of all, thank you on behalf of the Water Board and the Board of Directors for being there with your community tonight. I think the community's getting a sense that we all care. This is a collaborative effort that's going to take all of our focus and energy. And I want to tell your constituents what a great senator you have in Henry Stern. I've served with him on the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, and he's on top of all issues that impact your health, your way of life, and your neighborhood life. So, kudos, Senator Stern. It's so good to have you here with us. And when we have folks who are on different levels of government supporting us, we know we can do a great job. So thank you once again for taking an evening off of your very busy schedule to be with your community and with the Water Board.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, Regional Water Board, as you all are learning tonight, is tip of the spear. And they have a really hard job, but DTSC, the folks who have brought that up, have an equally critical job. And I'm going to be there with you guys all the way. But Chair Munoz, her team at Regional Board, I think, they're going to be partners with us is what I'm hearing. And yet you all have every right to remain skeptical. And that's a healthy way to go into a process like this. So keep it up, and we'll make progress here together.
Thank you, Senator Stern. So I'm going to go to 2 questions, once again, that have been typed into the Q&A feature. The first one comes from Grace Lara, and it says, can you describe the fluctuation of the groundwater? If groundwater is contaminated and the water tables rise, would that not recontaminate the soil and further exacerbate vapor contamination? Wouldn't that also require further excavation?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. The groundwater does go up and down. I'm not over here. It's at approximately 16 feet below the ground surface, and fluctuations are limited. The groundwater is contaminated. The contamination is contained in the groundwater. And like we discussed earlier, it is being remediated. The remediation is working, and it's pulling the plume in and into a smaller and smaller footprint. So your concern, I hope that answers your concern. It's getting better, and the plume is getting better. So the threat to human health is getting better. There still is concern because of off-gassing from or vapor coming off the groundwater, but it is improving. And Dr. Heath, would you like to, or Anna, would you like to talk more about the groundwater and if you have data on the fluctuation?
Yeah, at this site, we've only really seen 2 to 3 feet of fluctuations since about 2011. And I think that's another reason why we have the land use covenant also to have a vapor mitigation system in place, because we still have contaminated groundwater at the site. And this site, the groundwater is so shallow, so we have that extra layer of protection there.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Kay Winnert. Will the community receive current updates on how the cleanup is progressing?
The answer is yes, a definite yes. We have a number of methods where we inform the community and get your input, and there's no one better to talk about that than our public participation specialist, Susanna. So would you like to jump in?
Well, I think we discussed a little bit before about how this will work, but yes, we are. We now have a greatly expanded, what we would normally call interested parties list, thanks to the group who came to the February 12th board meeting and presented some 6,000 plus petitions to our board members at that time. Normally for our site communications and mail outs and distribution, we mail project updates and notices, work notices, and other things related to the site to a 500-foot radius from the edge of whatever known groundwater contaminated plume exists. But after this meeting, we went through the 6,000 plus petitions and deciphered as best we could the handwritten names and addresses and added all of those to the interested parties list, so that any kind of communication about this site that goes out to the public, whether it's for comment or whether we are at a stage where we've completed some investigation and we're going to communicate the results of that investigation and let you know where the next steps are, all of you will receive those. You can also sign up for them if you find that you found out about this meeting from somebody else. But yes, every time there's a landmark or something that happens in a project, we will be issuing, and we do this in English and in Spanish, as we did with the FAQs that were issued and the project update that was issued, the invitation to this meeting, and to any future communications that will come in both English and in Spanish. And they will come on a regular basis when there's something to report or something that's going to be out for public comment.
And thank you, Susanna. And I'd also like to point out that every month our executive officer does an executive officer report to our board. And that's a public forum. And she does update the board on the status of this site and anything any updates on the site, anything new that's happening, work plans or whatever. She does talk to the board and to the public and inform us during her EO updates. So that's another avenue where you can get information about the site too.
Okay, so now it looks like I'm supposed to go back to questions that were received previous to the meeting, but it looks like a lot of them are being duplicated in the Q&A. So let's keep on with a couple of those because there's duplications. We have a question from Abigail Nolasco. It says, how effective is vapor mitigation? We're all familiar that vapor mitigation can fail, such as the Google headquarters in Mountain View. Whether the future tenants are residential or commercial, why shouldn't more soil removal and groundwater remediation be done in conjunction with vapor mitigation to ensure the safety of future tenants?
Thank you for your question. And to answer your question, the primary source of soil vapor is the contaminated soil itself. And that for the most part has been removed from the site, excavated down to groundwater and in cases even below groundwater and removed from the site. So that source is gone. We do have an ongoing source of vapor coming off the groundwater. And that is what I'm assuming you're talking about being mitigated. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Heath and Jim Carlisle to talk about vapor mitigation systems. Thank you.
Yeah, so let me just start off with, and Jim is probably more of the expert on the type of systems, but typically when we start to look at developers who want to come in on a site like this and develop buildings, we would look at their mitigation systems. And typically, you know, besides the foundation, they would have liners beneath the foundation. They would, and we're a big believer, especially on a site where we're still cleaning up the shallow groundwaters, to put in some type of piping or conveyance system. And this was already brought up, I believe, with someone to vent whatever vapors that might accumulate underneath these barriers in the foundation and out to the atmosphere. That's really regulated by AQMD, the Air Management Quality District. And so, I mean, and that's the typical way that we would look at mitigation systems. And this is also done in conjunction with OHIA, the risk assessors. And so Jim, and that's why, you know, in the land use covenant, it talks about getting the approval of the water board in terms of overseeing any development, whether it's commercial or proposed residential. But I'm going to hand it off to you, Jim. Thank you.
The only way we can determine the effectiveness of a vapor mitigation system is to sample indoor air with the system in place.
And that's built into the LUC.
And the land use covenant, correct?
Right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't, yeah. And so they would have to have probes below the foundation, indoor air, and monitor it on a basis where if there is a problem, then there would be a contingency plan to deal with it.
Okay, so we have another few questions, I think for city planning. Once again, Karen DiBiase says, a stadium entertainment center must be limited to 7,500 seats, must be fully enclosed with a fixed roof, must provide for 100% of the parking requirement on site, and must have access to from Freeway 101 to be completed prior to approval and construction. Can this be a requirement and be included with any approvals given by LA City's Planning Department?
Okay, yes, this is Tim Fargo again with City Planning. So what's being mentioned here seems to be referring to the recent zoning administrator decision regarding the Westfield Promenade site and the entertainment center proposed for that site. If a similar proposal was made for this site and would require a zoning administrator approval, that decision would be made by the zoning administrator for the case at that time, and likely would take the previous decision for the promenade into consideration when making any decisions about this site. Obviously, that's a long way off. We don't have any proposal for this site. We don't have any knowledge of a stadium proposed for this particular site. I do want to say, though, that entertainment uses are allowed in this district. It's in the Uptown district of Warner Center, which does allow active and other performance uses, including but not limited to live music, live performances, karaoke, comedy clubs, dance clubs, theaters, bars, taverns, and billiard halls or similar uses. So there are entertainment uses that are allowed on this site in terms of the land use. But again, there's no proposal that we have before us for this site, and we have no knowledge of any stadium or entertainment center that would be proposed there.
Thank you. Let's go back to some raised hands, Molly.
Absolutely. Our next question will be from a participant signed in as Home Folder. Please allow a moment for us to unmute your mic. Once your mic is unmuted, you may ask your question.
Is there someone who is associated with a sign-in called Home Folder? Maybe you thought you were signing in with your name? Can you put that just a little bit down in the queue and let's go to the next raise hand, Molly?
Sure thing. Our next question will come from Nicholas Hernandez. Nicholas, please allow a moment for us to unmute your mic. And when your mic is unmuted, you may ask your question.
Hey, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I want to preface this question by going off of what Senator Stern had said of highlighting people. And I really want to highlight the community members who got those petitions and spent countless hours in various weathers, knocking on doors and outreaching to the community. I think, they were the real heroes in this scenario.
Y divulgando su mensaje.
I'm sorry,
Lo siento, creo que...
Yeah, it's okay. I'll wait. Okay, I think we're good. So now to begin my questions, I want to, there's some confusion regarding soil, the vapor contamination. So hopefully this help clarify this. Where are the existing hotspots of vapor contamination, and are they only in areas where there's groundwater contamination? I bring up this fact because if there are hotspots of vapor contamination outside of groundwater plume, this suggests that there remains contaminated soil that needs to be removed. Therefore, any type of soil closure would be significantly premature and especially harmful.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. And yeah, I think you're right. If we have soil vapor hotspots around the site, and we're looking at that for that particular reason. We want to make sure that all the contaminated soil was removed. And these hotspots, yeah, some of them are undoubtedly outside the groundwater plume. So they may be related to secondary sources or small sources where contamination was not identified. And what we are doing is looking, if that shows up, then yeah, we will be looking at the soil too and addressing the soil contamination by, remediation, excavation, whatever the appropriate measure is. But we are looking, your point is like totally valid, and we hear you, and we are following up by investigating more and looking and ensuring that the site will be safe for you, for the community and human health.
Okay, do we have another raised hand, Molly?
We do. Our next question will be from Bonnie. Bonnie, please allow a moment for us to unmute your microphone. And once you're unmuted, you may ask your question.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. As I told you before, I helped 50 workers who worked in the plutonium laboratory in the Van Owen building in 1958. Their laboratory exploded. The Atomic Energy Commission came out from Westwood and they tested. There was plutonium everywhere on the ground, on the ceiling, on the roof, on the road. And I got those workers compensated who had cancer with the federal program. And I'm very concerned, since they had to sign lifetime secrecy, that there are accidents that nobody else knows about and that you may be missing. And also I'm very concerned about the missing reactor. It's never been found. And I know they were small, but have you done enough testing for radiation contamination? And I know there were drillers maybe 3 years ago drilling on the property, and they got a big dose of radiation and they stopped drilling. And I had a newspaper reporter call me and ask me about what they used there. So I'm very concerned that you may be missing this contamination from the plutonium laboratory and from the missing reactor.
Thank you, Ms. Clear, for your questions and comments. And I have to say that we have no information or records that indicate a plutonium explosion occurred at this site. And
it was top secret. 50 workers had to sign lifetime secrecy.
But,
and we filmed the last man who was living who told about the accident. He's on film in his nursing home, and we have the whole story on film. And if the film ever comes out, that will be in it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I have to add too that there were radiologic surveys done in 1959 and 1960, and again in 1995 and 2007. And the data showed that there was no plutonium present in soil or groundwater. And we don't have any, we're not aware of any uranium cleanup reports for this site. And we don't have data showing that there was a release of uranium at this site. I mean, we know that there were several uranium fires at Santa Susana, for example. And we also know that there was a worker from Santa Susana who was involved with fighting those uranium fires, who was given an award at this Van Owen facility for fighting.
Okay, well, and also,
if maybe
okay,
that's.
And also, Mr. Marley, you say that the sites are not connected. Believe me, they're intimately connected. Intimately connected. My husband spent 40 years working at Canoga, and 5 to 10 years he spent up at ETEC. So they were very, very connected. And I worked at both sites also, and I got cancer. And my husband, who was there 40 years, he's very, very sick.
And I'm so sorry to hear that you and your husband are not in good health, Bonnie. I truly am sorry, and I empathize with you. But the sites, yeah, they're geographically not linked, and they built rockets over here. They built rocket engines, and they did take them to Santa Susana to have them tested. And if that's the link, yeah, there's that link. But geographically, and as far as the type of industry that was ongoing, they're totally disconnected in that way. And I hope I hope my answer helped, Bonnie, but I hope it did. So and if you have information and you want to share that with us, we'd be happy to take it and look into it further. But at the moment,
it was lifetime secrecy, and the last man who was alive is now dead.
Yeah. And
so how do you deal with secrecy on nuclear work?
Yeah, I can add that there was sampling done by the NRC. They had declared the site clean and closed. UTC had also did their own sampling of the site, both soil and groundwater, and radiological sampling in and around the area of Building 48. And they got nothing over background. They found no plutonium or even uranium, because uranium was 235 was what was being used in the reactors at this site. So
okay, well, you show one slide of a big hole in the ground. What was taken out of
that? Thank you for pointing that out. That was it didn't. I'm not sure that's Building 38. That was an example of how soil is being excavated, contaminated soil is being dug out and removed and taken away from the site, all the way from the surface down to even below groundwater. So it's no longer a source of contamination that human health.
Was that a below ground level room or a building?
It's from the photo that I showed you on that slide. What it appears to be is a floor slab, and they're digging contamination out from below the floor slab. And we can certainly get to you the area where that photo was taken and make that available to you in the various.
Okay. Well, in the federal program for sick workers, they included the whole site, every single building, every inch of that property. They covered the workers, all the workers, not just Van Owen building. And this is for nuclear damage.
Ms. Clea, thank you so much for your comments, and we certainly hear your concerns, and we're happy to follow up with you. We do want to make sure that we give others an opportunity. We still have a lot of hands raised. Would like to make sure that we do give others an opportunity to ask questions so we can get to as many people as possible.
Yes, thank you.
We're happy to follow up with you. Thank you.
So if we can go to the next raised hand, and I think that perhaps we will do, how many more raised hands do we have, Molly, or are there quite a few?
We have about 6 more raised hands.
Okay, so let's try to go there. I'll make a 15-minute check in about 10 more minutes, and then we can see about getting people to type into the Q&A feature any outstanding questions and comments, so that what we can't get to tonight, we'll be sure to get back and record. They'll be recorded, and we'll be able to address them in our response to comments and further updates about the site. But let's stick with the raised hands for now.
Okay, great. Our next question will be from Chris Rowe. Chris, please allow a moment for us to unmute your mic, and when you're unmuted, you may ask your question.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes,
we can.
I want to thank the whole panel, everyone that's there today. As you know, I've been involved with this project since 2016. And I have reached out to all of you because I felt like when you notified the 500-foot radius, you were getting no response from the community. And I've always been concerned, you know, this site was not just the Rocketdyne site that was referenced earlier, but it was also a NASA Air Force plant, you know, during the wartime period. And so my concern is not just what's under the site, but going to the west under the Topanga Plaza, for example, there could have been from releases from other things under there, because I'm not sure exactly of where the NASA footprint was relative to this site as well, if it extended beyond there, because we know the whole Rocketdyne facility was much greater. It went over to where Orange Line is, went to Catalina Yachts, and of course south where the main headquarters is and beyond there. So my concern is, again, hotspots offsite, like for example, when you talk about no agricultural on site, but you've got Canoga Park High School with an ag program over on that corner, just to the north west. And then you have a senior living facility that was noticed. It's kind of just to the north, just sort of around that Alabama area, I believe. And that address I gave to you earlier, if you noticed, it was a part, initially the plume did go under that building. And so I am concerned about that we may treat the Vado zone, but say we have a large rain event or something in the future, then the groundwater table raises. And so then the potential for vapor intrusion. So I would really like to see the results of more wells offsite in the directions, particularly to the north, at the high school, closer to those facilities. And the fact that they're definitely putting, as was stated by city planning, and thank you to city planning for being there, by the way, a building at 21515 Van that's residential. We definitely need to sample that area for groundwater that could move up at a later point in time for vapor intrusion, so that they are mandated, if they build their residential, to do similar vapor barriers and vapor, you know, monitoring and whatever. They should have a land use covenant on that property. You know, if you sample and determine that there's any there. So thank you again for all of your time. This meeting is excellent, and it represents other meetings I've seen of the Water Board. I'm very appreciative of all of you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Ms. Rowe. And you have also sent them in writing, and so we definitely have a record of them. And thank you very much for being here tonight. Can we go to the next raised hand?
Okay, great. Our next question will be from a participant signed in as AMQ. Please allow a moment for us to unmute your mic, and once you're unmuted, you may ask your question.
I think we should go to the next raised hand just for time's sake. Oh, unless it sounds like somebody's coming in.
Well, this is Renee. It looked like the individual was still muted. Now they're unmuted. So if you are going by the
I'm here. Yeah, Aaron Quantz. Sorry. At what point, if ever, does the city or city planning take over for the monitoring of future toxic mitigation as a site is redeveloped, which is eminent in the Warner Center area?
Thank you for that question. The monitoring is in the purview of the Water Board at the moment, and I don't see this changing in the near future. The remediation is going to continue for a while. We're cleaning up the soil vapor. We're cleaning up maybe soil, and we're definitely going to be cleaning up the groundwater for many years. And all of this requires monitoring and sampling, and we require that, and we would be evaluating that, and it would be under our purview and our jurisdiction. I hope that answered your question.
So can we have another question from the raised hands, please?
Yes, let's have a question from Jordan. Please allow a moment for us to unmute your mic. And once you're unmuted, you may ask your question.
Good evening. My name is Jordan Sisson. I'm an environmental lawyer and speaking on behalf of Jane and Jim over at California Communities Against Toxics. At the outset, again, I just want to thank staff tremendously for all the several meetings that you guys had with our experts here. And I also want to thank Madam Chair Munoz for attending this. It's great to see you here late at night monitoring this very important meeting, and it's a very important workshop. So as you heard from my colleagues, Jane and Jim earlier, we have some significant concerns about any sort of form of a completion letter. These concerns were expressed very clearly in our very brief 3-page comments that we submitted earlier today. And I respectfully urge the entire staff and Madam Chair to read that letter. It identifies 5 key concerns that we had. And it all kind of stems to this kind of contradictory information we're hearing from the public. And I think that's kind of my question. Here the notice says consideration of a soil remediation completion letter in accordance with the soil plan. But again, the soil plan and the M&D that it was used contemplated residential. But again, that doesn't kind of square with what we know so far. Additionally, the site is zoned under the general plan, and previous conceptual plans envisions mixed-use residential. But then we hear about this land use covenant that allows commercial development at much more permissive standards. And additionally, tonight you hear about this completion letter, but that further assessment and maybe even more soil removal might be necessary. So this is just a lot of confusion, and so it's understandable. So with that, my question is whether staff considered the implications of any soil completion or partial closure letter and the implications of that. Has staff considered the potential abuse of maybe a poorly worded completion or partial completion of soil remediation? Here UTC already has in its arm what we would consider a premature land use covenant. Any sort of future vague completion letter could be argued by UTC as vesting some sort of property right that would allow them to block what we are hearing tonight is future assessments, future remediation, future attacking the source removal. So, would it not be easier for the water board to tell the public, we've considered the comments carefully, and at this time, we're not in a position to issue any sort of closure letter, partial, semi-partial, anything along those lines. And I would submit that, and again, thank you all for your time and having this workshop tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. Thank you for your comments and your question. And yes, we did receive your comments, and they're part of the record and be addressed by us, of course. And I just want to say that we're meeting here today in our public participation process too. It's all intended to clear up any misconceptions, to clear up any confusion, to take away any concerns you, the public, the community have regarding this and any other actions on this site. That's the purpose here. No decision was made, and no decision is going to be made tonight. We're considering your comments. It's like having 1,000 extra pair of eyes looking at this document and looking at the data and telling us what you think and your concerns are, and we're going to we are considering them and we'll address them. So totally appreciate that. What you pointed out is the process and what we're doing to reach out to you. And I'd really like Sophie to talk about the LUC and your concerns about the LUC. So Sophie, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So, Mr. Sisson, first of all, thank you for your letter, and rest assured that I will discuss your legal theories with you as set forth in that letter offline and fully respond to them. I appreciate the fact that you've raised them. In terms of the LUC, we view the LUC as actually being very protective of any development that will be on site. It keeps any development squarely within our purview. It keeps all mitigation and all cleanup within our purview, and it ensures that we have our fingers kind of on the pulse of public health, and that we will not allow any development on site that would harm public health, and anything that would be on site will be safe. And so that's why we put that on there, to give folks notice. And I think I went into this a little bit before. That's why we did this now. It's not necessarily out of order. It's not necessarily premature. In fact, in this case, we wanted to make sure everyone knew if they were going to buy the site, if they were going to develop the site, which is not imminent at this time, as we've heard from the city. They don't even have a plan to consider it. But in the event that it becomes imminent, we will be able to ensure with the city that this site will be safe and safely developed. So in terms of your legal theories, again, I will get back to you directly, and any response to comments will be available for the entire public. Anything you'd like me to add in that regard, Hugh?
No, thank you, Sophie.
Okay.
So I am going to take the 15-minute time check here, and we do have a lot of raised hands and outstanding questions in the Q&A. So what I'd like to suggest is that we continue with as many raised hands as possible. But in the meantime as well, if you would like, if you think that you may not be gotten to with a raised hand, if you can go ahead and type into the Q&A feature. All of this will be recorded, and your comments actually we will be saving. And so if we aren't able to get to them, we have a record. And as Sophie said, they will all be addressed in our response to comments, which will be available to all of the public and also in further updates about the site. So let's just continue until 8:30 with the raised hands if we can, Molly.
Absolutely. Let's try to give home folder one more opportunity to ask a question. If you're signed in with the username of home folder, we're going to unmute you and give you an opportunity to ask a question. So once you're unmuted, you can go ahead and speak.
Hello?
Hi there. Yes.
Hi. And I put this on the Q&A too, because I wasn't sure you're going to get to me, but I appreciate it. And thanks so much for holding this conference for everybody.
Who's speaking, please?
Pardon?
Can you tell us your name, please? Because you only come up as home folder, so we don't know how to address you.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Rick Spalding. You actually.
Oh, yes. Hi, Mr. Spalding.
Hi. So, and I kind of think that Mr. Marley has answered the question, but would there be any chance if the water board issues this soils closure or management plan compliance letter in the future, if soil removal is necessary to address the vapor intrusion, what would prevent NTC or any future developer from suing the water board to prevent reopening the site?
So thank you, Mr. Spalding, for that. And it verges on a legal question about suing the water board. So I'm going to ask our attorney, Sophie, to please address that.
Thank you.
If you're there, Sophie.
Here I am. Shoot. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, I apologize. I was kicked out of Zoom there for a second, but I am okay now. Sorry about that. Okay, so nothing prevents us from reopening a site if human health is at risk. That is our charge, and that is, I think, the simplest answer to your question. And also, I would like to let you know that in our experience, and by our, I mean me and my co-counsel here, who's actually in the background, we have never heard of this kind of lawsuit seeking to prevent us from reopening when human health is actually at issue or could be impacted by something that we are doing. And, you know, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why we haven't heard of that, but one of those, I think, may be for the simple fact that, you know, if we're seeking to reopen a site because we have information that leads us to believe that human health may be adversely impacted, I don't think that lawsuit would be successful. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've been asked to go back to the Q&A for a little bit because we have a lot of questions. So there is one from Ann Katz. Could you explain exactly how the groundwater is cleaned?
Oh, yes, thank you. And I had pointed out a couple of remediation technologies that are actually used on this site and were effective. And one is the pump and treat, where the water is pumped out and run through filters or air sparging units. Well, the water is pumped out, the water is cleaned, and then the clean water is either put back into the aquifer or into a storm drain or the city sewer. And the second is called bioremediation, where bacteria are injected into the contamination. These are special bacteria that can eat the contamination, the solvents in this case, and they literally eat the solvents and leave clean water behind. But I would ask Dr. Arthur Heath, our site cleanup chief, to add to that, please.
I think just one second, let me get my camera back on. I think you've answered the question, Hugh, but for the bioremediation, typically they use a combination of injected bacteria and the natural bacteria that is present in the soil, in the groundwater, a portion of that, and they typically will add some additive that has been approved by the regional board under their waste discharge requirements. And then you have that action going on in terms of at some point you have the right bacteria breaking down the chlorinated compounds. And you know, it's an opportunity for Anna if you want to opine on that further, but it's really up to you. Thank you.
No, I think you captured that correctly. We did pump and treat here, and also are currently doing in situ bioremediation.
Okay, and Jill Stewart says on Nextdoor, a large number of neighbors involved in Sierra Club, Angelinos for Trees, and other groups are worried that this is going too fast. Are you going faster than normal for such a cleanup leading to residential development?
Thank you for that question, and I have to admit that is contrary to what we typically hear for our cleanup sites, and especially what we've been hearing for this site. We get a lot of concern that and comments from folks going, "Why is this taking so long? Why aren't you moving faster?" I got to tell you that site cleanups, including this one, they take a long time. It's a very involved process. Our job's to make sure it's safe for all future use. And you know, we've been working on this site since really 1984 is when we started our oversight at this site. We've cleaned up a lot of contamination, cleaned up a lot of soil vapor too, and groundwater. So I don't know if it if I would say we're going to pass over here, we are trying to move with, as fast as we possibly can, but site cleanups take a long time. They're a very involved process. And we will be on the site for years, many years, because of the contamination that we're still dealing with. Thank you.
Okay, is there an Elizabeth Ine with a raised hand, Molly?
I don't see Elizabeth with a raised hand. We do have some additional raised hands,
Okay.
but I don't see Elizabeth.
We have about 5 more minutes, so let's go back to the raised hands, please.
Okay, great. AJ Greenstein, it's your turn to ask a question. Please allow a moment for us to unmute your microphone, and when you're unmuted, you may speak.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. My name's Adam. I was actually only able to attend this Zoom meeting over the last 15 minutes, and I just wanted to mention, I have a background in both this site and Santa Susana, and there was, I don't know if this was already brought up, so excuse me if it was, but there was a DTSC meeting regarding Santa Susana tonight. There's not a lot of Zoom meetings going on right now. They're months apart. So the idea that there was 2 meetings on the same night regarding issues that people might have information and want to be a part of was a little bit disappointing and frustrating. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And what you're talking about is the overlap with any other meeting is purely coincidental. We intended to have this meeting at an earlier date, but for several reasons, it got pushed a few times to this date. And if there's another meeting for DTSC at Santa Susana, that's absolutely purely coincidental. But point taken. Going forward in the future, we will. We are going to have more meetings, but we will coordinate with DTSC and other agencies and make sure that we're not overlapping with anybody. So we would have your full attention. So thank you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And this is Renee. I just want to chime in as well. We do apologize for that conflict. As Hugh said, it was unintended, and we are going to do everything we can to ensure that that sort of conflict does not happen again. I do want to let you and others know that maybe we're trying to divide your time between the 2 meetings, that we are recording this meeting. And so if you'd like to be able to go back and listen to the part of the meeting that you weren't able to participate in, we will make sure that everybody knows how to access the recording of the meeting.
Yeah, I don't know if you could still hear me, but it was just related to being a part of it, being able to have a back and forth and
I definitely understand that is not, a recording does not replace that. If you do have comments that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to reach out and let us know.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Okay, and I think we have time for 1 more raised hand.
Okay, our next raised hand is Jane Williams. So we'll go ahead and unmute you.
We're going full circle, Jane. Hi, you started off the meeting and now you can be the last raised hand.
Well, I hope I can say something meaningful. Listen, I want to encourage everybody who is listening to me to go look at Franklin, Indiana, and what's happening there. You have a county, it has a large Superfund site called the Amphenol site, very similar to this site with lots of TCE in the soil vapors and the groundwater. And they have one of the largest childhood cancer clusters now in the country. And one of the things that I've heard tonight that is very concerning to me is this mythology that I heard repeated by water board members and county planning, that the source of the vapors is the groundwater. That's not how this works, okay? The vapors in the soil run along sewer lines. They run along utility corridors. It's like a freeway system. All this underground piping is like a freeway system for these vapors. And what they found at that Amphenol site is that homes up to 5 miles away were contaminated because TCE was running along the sewer lines. And we've known about this site now for a long time. This is my 30th year of doing this work. When I first came into this field, soil vapor intrusion was an issue. And it's really shocking to me that we haven't looked off-site for vapor intrusion. They used to take engines at this facility and pump TCE through them for 30 minutes. And the TCE would just go out on the ground. So there is a lot of TCE here, okay? So I urge everyone to go look at if it was your child, okay? It's the women that have gotten together whose kids have died in Franklin, Indiana, from that Amphenol site. Now they found another plume in that community. And this is some of the cutting edge vapor intrusion that's been done by Edison Wetlands Association, which is a nonprofit. And you know, the implications for public health of these soil vapor intrusion sites are very real. And it's really appalling to me that we've known that this site was a problem, that it had vapor intrusion issues for 3 decades now, and we've never done offsite testing. So I really encourage us we got this issue in front of us. I understand you've got our comments on it. I look forward to working with the water board staff, but this is not so much a question as really like the public health implications of vapors running along public infrastructure under the ground and coming up into buildings and people's homes and businesses is a very real construct now. And I think both the planning department and the water board and OWEHA really should be taking this a lot more seriously and paying more attention to it. So thank you. That's more of a comment than a question. I just want to thank everyone who is here tonight. I want to thank Chairman Munoz and the other board members for taking such an active role in this, the executive officer, and Dr. Heath, Mr. Marley, Anna Townsend. I look forward to working with you as we move forward on this site.
Thank you, Jane. And I just got to say, I have to reiterate, we are taking this very, very seriously. We're taking the health of the community, the health of the public, absolutely dead seriously. That's why we're here. And you know, yeah, and I also have to say, yeah, there were many sources on site, contamination on site that were sources of soil vapor, and most of them were removed. There might still be sources that we will be looking for with this new work plan that we're doing and the soil investigation we're doing. We do know the groundwater is also a source of soil vapor, and we are addressing that, and it's getting better. This new, as far as offsite goes, our most recent soil vapor investigation is going to be looking at the perimeter. We're going to be looking at concentrations along the edge of the site. And if we see something of concern that shows that maybe there is need to look offsite, we will be looking offsite. So and I have to end with this. You know, we are definitely most seriously concerned about the health of the community and the public, and we are trying to be as responsive and as concerned and caring and reaching out to the public and engaging with them on this. And so that's it. And thank you for your comments, Jane. So back to you, Susanna.
Okay, well, I have the unenviable task of saying that that's all the time we have left for this meeting. We'd like to thank everyone for your time and especially for your input. We're keeping a record of all outstanding questions and comments typed in the Q&A feature so that we can make sure to address those that we didn't get to in our response to comments and further updates about the site. As Renee mentioned, and as was noted in the beginning of the meeting, this meeting is being recorded for future viewing. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, awesome. Please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Anna Townsend, the site project manager. Our contact information is on this slide. Once again, we'll be reaching out via future community updates with the Los Angeles Water Board's response to public comments and information about further investigation and cleanup activities. We'd also like to ask you to help us improve our meetings by evaluating this evening's meeting. You can use the link on this slide to access the meeting evaluation. We'd appreciate you taking the time to complete the evaluation so we can design future meetings and communications to be responsive to your issues and concerns. And I believe now that Renee Purdy has some closing remarks, I'd like to say thank you again. Take care and be well.
Thank you so much, Susanna. I know that we are a bit over time, but I appreciate the opportunity to also just say my thanks again for spending the last 2.5 hours of your evening with us. And more importantly, even than that, for the time and the investment that you've made in throughout the process in writing comments to us. I know some of you, I recognize some of the names of those who came to our board meeting. It seems like such a long time ago, but we haven't at all forgotten the board meeting in February when many of you came. I believe Nicholas Hernandez, you were there, and many others. And we really appreciate your engagement with us and encourage you to continue to reach out if you have questions and concerns. And we hope we have been able to answer many of your questions about this site and the cleanup of this site and what is being done to make sure that your health is protected. Because as Hugh said, that is our top priority here, is to make sure that the contamination on site and off site is fully investigated and fully cleaned up to make sure that your health is protected. So again, I just want to express my gratitude for the time that you have spent with us this evening. And we look forward to providing you with continued updates about the status of this site and the cleanup.
Okay. Is that a good night?
I think so. So good night, everybody. I apologize. I should end with a good night. Yes. Good. Thank you all for coming, and wish you a good night and stay safe, and a happy Thanksgiving early as well.